The views discussed in this conversation are the views of individuals and not of Arrington Capital. This podcast is provided solely for informational purposes and is not financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. The participants of this podcast are not recommending any particular security, protocol, token, financial instrument, or other tradable asset or any investment strategy. It is not offering to sell or soliciting to buy any security or asset.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pirate Pod from Arrington Capital. Today, I'm excited about our guest, Hal from Rilla. We have looked at many deep end projects at Arrington. Rilla is one of the very few that we've invested in. Their core product is decentralized streaming infrastructure, which allows stream viewers to contribute their bandwidth to that streaming through a network of relayers, and we're going to dive into that. The team's been really focused on building out the strongest product that they can, finding product market fit. They're focused on efficiency and inclusion, especially with everybody along that value chain participating. We invested in Rilla back in 2024. Prior to crypto, I was in the media and entertainment space, and so I know of this challenge intimately, and I'm looking forward to diving in here on this conversation with Hal. But before we get started, Hal, can you share a little bit about your personal journey into crypto and what that was like, what sparked your interest, and how you ended up founding Rilla?
Yeah, let's do it. Wow, how do we get into crypto? I mean, I read the Bitcoin white paper way back in probably 2012, and I was studying comp sci at the time as a mature student, and that's another story entirely. We can do that. That's probably a too-big a conversation. But understood it from a distributed systems perspective. Didn't understand it from a game theory and the fact that we could program incentive systems into systems and the world around us. It took me a few years to really grok the impact of that. One of my co-founders, Paul Esty, we call him Paul, we've been jamming for like 10 years at this point. And we got into decentralized tech in terms of implementing and building in about 2019. And we've been dabbling, understanding crypto and playing around with it from maybe 2016, 2017, something like that. But we got into a project building essentially cryptographic provenance solutions for export. And so I've lived in New Zealand for half my life. I'm originally from the UK. And so we ended up in this, right at the boomer end of the spectrum, doing like, very like boring, not flashy stuff, but it really sparked our interest, and it sparked up a conversation that we've been having over the years and years about the role of decentralized technology and the intersection with AI. And we've been talking about this for a long, long time on many levels. And what that whole experience led to was founding a company called Altered State Machine. The initial mission there was to build decentralized infrastructure for training AI. It's like late 2020, early 2021, one or even two cycles too early, maybe, but really fun project. And we got that stuff working technically, but ZK just wasn't in a position for that to work economically. And so, fast forward, we had great success with that company. We pivoted into a bunch of gaming stuff, did some really interesting stuff. That's another story entirely. But we exited that company in 2023. It was acquired, and we did what all exited founders should do, which is start a game studio and build like that's another story entirely as well. We messed around with generative tech and this and gaming stuff, but through all of that and through our other co-founder, we came to this technical thesis for content delivery, utilizing decentralized infrastructure. And we're pragmatic idealists. We really believe in the impact of decentralized technology, and it kind of irked us that a lot of the projects were just this low-level genius, but conceptual implementation that wasn't really going into industries and making big impacts. And so we kind of made this pact of we're going to take this technology and this knowledge, and we're going to go and take it to an industry that's really bleeding and needs a lot of help. And our third co-founder, Justin Tomlinson, he has a background in streaming. He was the director of tech and product at Sky Europe, has worked with the Murdochs for years, knows everybody in that industry, and has built multiple global streaming platforms. And he really validated what we were talking about and said, look, this is a really hard set of problems. And so yeah, we ended up founding Rilla January 2024. with a decentralized infrastructure concept that is essentially AI optimized peer-to-peer content delivery. And yeah, it's a really hard, gnarly problem, but it works. And we've just been having fun ever since, basically. And yeah, that's some tidbits of the story so far, and how we got to what we're doing.
And the team came together. Did you all work together previously, or did this sort of organically happen? Because there's three of you, right?
Yeah, there's three of us
There's three of us
co-founders.
co-founders.
Me and Paul have about 10 years of history together. So we've been involved in different capacities in about five ventures, either as, early employees, founding team members, and more recently founders together. We've done some cool stuff. We've deployed like AI into healthcare in the States with a company called Vital, really formative part of my career. Um, we've done work with like air traffic control, critical real-time systems in critical environments, these types of things. And so, yeah, we've been across lots of domains and had lots of fun. Justin Tomlinson, he's a bit older than us. He's been a multi-time FTSE 30 CTO. He is, a career technologist, CTO, and executive with a background in streaming. But we've been friends, and he's been a mentor to me for the last sort of 4 years through some of the stuff I've been doing in the companies I founded, and so we're pretty tight. We're a group of friends and comrades in this mission for sure.
And he was previously at Sky, right?
That's right. He was the director of tech and product at Sky Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a big deal. So that's a good segue into setting the stage on sort of the overall streaming, content delivery, media, and entertainment status. If you were to step back, because you've seen a bunch of different industries, what do people not realize about that space today?
Without getting too technical and keeping it conceptual before we dive into some of the technical stuff, the fact that every single gigabyte that moves around the internet in terms of what we watch at the moment goes through the hands of probably five main cloud vendors. I think if you do the math, it's 70% of the entire market is owned by five main cloud vendors. And the lock-in of those walled gardens, they're pretty fortified, is frightening. And the monopolistic pricing, especially data egress, anyone who's dealt with big systems that involve data egress in these, it's extractive and extortionate. And so that's one of the things, and we're all paying, right? So if you look at your subscription fee for the streaming platform that you watch live sports on, for example, there is a portion of that subscription fee that covers the infrastructure cost, and that infrastructure cost is being funneled into one of those five cloud vendors almost definitely. And the internet wasn't really designed to work that way. Like if you look at the way the elegance of the underlying internet is beautifully decentralized, and peer-to-peer as a concept kind of got thrown out. The baby got thrown out with the bathwater when we all sort of. But JT says it best. He says the peer-to-peer baby was thrown out with the content protection bathwater. Right? And what he means there is, you know, in 2006, 60, 70% of the traffic on the internet was peer-to-peer. Unfortunately, it was all BitTorrent, and the value wasn't actually being sent back to the people who were generating the value, and that was a problem. And so what we did is peer-to-peer became taboo, right? And nobody sort of thought it was okay to use the internet as it was designed because of this situation. But that's really just a attribution and value distribution problem. And between 2006 and today, there's been some really important technological advances. Blockchain allows us to do exactly that. Like the cryptographic primitives around blockchain allow us to do attribution and granular distribution of value based on contribution within a large system. And so you put these things together, and all of a sudden you realize that we can actually start using the internet as it was designed again. And what that means, and I feel like I've gone way out of off piste here, but I mean this is the core of our identity and what we're doing. What that means is that the value that's generated in the network can start to flow outwards to the participants as opposed to be funneled upwards into, like, frankly, these five big cloud vendors in terms of infrastructure. Um, and that's profound, right? We look at Metcalfe's law in terms of how we measure the value of a network, right? The proportional to the square of the number of users of that network. Um, but that makes the assumption that every user of that network interacts with one another. And the current architecture of the internet as we're currently using it isn't that at all. It's big hub and spoke architectures where everybody must go and request from the infrastructure overlords that they be delivered this information, and that they must then pay through the nose for the right to use the internet. And it's just not the way it should be. But it's a technological problem. And the reason that these underlying systems and architectures exist is just because it was too hard. It's too hard to do the accounting, attribution, distribution of value problem. It's too hard to do the continuous optimization problem as well. And this is the core of what Rilla is. The core technology of Rilla is AI for continuous optimization and cryptographic primitives to allow for the attribution and granular distribution of value. And when you put those two things together, it allows you to completely rewire the economics of actually multiple industries, but we're laser focused on sports streaming.
Can you comment on the size of this market also? I mean, content's continued to become more and more. It's all we look at. It's all that's scrolling is just little videos. And, I remember we used to use the example that 1 half-hour television show takes up the same amount of storage as an entire hospital's worth of data. So can you comment on the size of this market opportunity?
I mean, I can give you a simple number that sums up what Rilla's TAM is essentially. Because because the numbers are enormous, right? If you get into looking at all of the data that is moved around the internet in terms of video streaming, it is just wild. And anyone who says they've got those numbers, they don't. They're just making them up. But if you slice it down to sports streaming, you can get some relatively accurate numbers. And so what Rilla intends to do is take, in the first instance, all sports streaming and essentially reduce the cost by an order of magnitude. Now, if we were to do that, and then we just took 20% of that saving as a revenue into Rilla, the TAM is around 5 billion annual, right? And that is a slim slice of everything, and then taking a small percentage of just the savings. That gives you kind of an idea of where this sits in terms of magnitude. It is a insane amount of data that's moving around the internet, and you put even a small amount of friction in the middle of that, it's going to have massive compounding effects in terms of economic value and efficiency. But if you completely mis-architect the entire thing, you're just causing massive amounts of drag and cost in a system that really should be running a lot more efficiently.
So speaking of efficiency, do you think that the sports live streaming, the sports world media is ready for this change? I'm being very, very broad, not sports, but media and entertainment went to the cloud, 10, 15 years after the rest of the world. So my question to you, because you've been playing around in this space for a while, like, why was there no Web 2 solution and moving to Web 3, which I understand makes total sense from an economics and how that can flow through and be more efficient. But is the sports world ready for this?
I think what we find talking to the global scale sports streamers that we talk to is that it's not really about when they get into their comfort zone. They're actually bleeding out right now. If you look at the losses that are being reported across some of these big, and I'm not going to point fingers, but go and do a bit of digging on some of the big platforms. And the situation, the way it's described to us, is really interesting. They have the old school platform, so satellite cable, that is not going anywhere. They have to maintain that. There's a big fixed cost around maintaining that. And then you've got their, what they call OTT, which is their internet-based streaming platform. And that actually has a linear cost. So they've got what they call cord cutters over here that are scrapping their cable and moving across onto internet-based services. The cost of this platform is not going down. And for every additional viewer they add on this side, the cost is growing linearly. And so they're in between a rock and a hard place. And if they don't address this cost, it economically doesn't make sense. And so it's not really about them sort of getting comfortable with it and moving towards it in the way that they moved from on-prem to cloud. It's really about the raw economics of their business not making sense.
Yeah, they don't have a choice at this point.
They really don't. They have to find a solution. And what Rilla does, just to be clear, is it turns that linear cost into a logarithm and starts to flatten out, especially at scale. And it does that by pushing the network out into the network requirement out into the audience and allowing the audience to be part of the network delivery, the content delivery network. And that's great for streamers, big broadcasters. And this is what we're doing right now. We're in pilots integrating with some of the biggest global streamers and broadcasters. But what's even more interesting is when you bring the cryptographic primitives, a proof of contribution, into that network of audience members that are now contributing. It opens a really interesting door to different ways that you can move the needle on the metrics that these guys really care about, like engagement and churn. And I'm not sure if some of these big players are agile and ready enough to implement gamification strategies around their viewership and actually start to redistribute some of that saved value back out into their audience and subscriber base. But they definitely should. And what this technology does is open the door to a whole new paradigm of implementations where the audience is being rewarded for their engagement, and you can paint that in 1,000 different ways, and you can redistribute that value in so many different ways. And that's really the paradigm shift that this technology represents. And that's where complete categories will be rewired in terms of the way that value gets redistributed. What we're doing with football teams at the moment is a great example of that. So you take a team and their fan base, and at the moment they do a content rights deal with the league, and then a broadcaster sits in the middle and they deliver that live content from the matches that the team play through to their fan base. And they're in the middle extracting all of the value of that, any advertising revenue, etc., all goes up through the funnel there. But this technology enables a club to, if they wanted to, carve out and go direct to consumer with their fan base. Their fan base becomes the delivery network. It's essentially a digital stadium where everybody is contributing to allow everybody else to watch and unlock a huge amount of value for everyone in that relationship. And it allows the club and the fans to co-own that entire experience and all of the value that's being generated by that engagement. And that's where we get really excited, because reducing the cost to serve for broadcasters is great. That's a great business. That's a very strong revenue generating business. And if they know what they're doing, they'll redistribute some of that value amongst their subscribers, but they may not. They may decide to just stuff it in the pockets of their shareholders, and that's okay too. But where we really care about it is where we see changes in the economic model and the value starting to be redistributed out to the edges of the network. And that's where the paradigm shifts and you start to get whole new economic models around
and I think
things like sports.
I think most people don't realize that some of these teams and leagues are struggling with how to engage their fan base in new ways, right? There's only so many hot dogs and t-shirts that can be sold. And so I think, you bring up a really good point about the opportunity there just for people that want to participate and support their teams in a deep way, especially when they're given part of the economic model. There was a Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight last November, end of 2024. I think it was in Texas. It was a really big deal for Netflix. First time they were getting into live streaming or just live boxing. I don't know. But I
They
think the
did some
story, and I
live
don't,
comedy, I think, but that was their first live sports, if I'm correct. Yeah.
I think, yeah, it was a big deal for live boxing. It was a big deal for Netflix. And they had 60 to 80 million people that were tuned in live around the world. And some of the headlines coming out the following day was the fact that massive numbers of those people had missed major moments of the fight. And, they were describing it as, I couldn't watch it. It was impossible to watch. It just kept rendering. How would Rilla, had Netflix been streamed on a peer-to-peer network, Rilla, how would that have gone differently for them as a fun example to play out?
Yeah, it's a great example. I think it's fair to caveat this in saying that there are only a few platforms in the world that do that level of concurrence. Indian cricket is probably one of the most advanced examples of being able to do 60 million concurrence. And so we have to be fair with Netflix here. We would expect Netflix to be able to solve this problem, right? But it is a hard problem. Now, Rilla Network would make it
Wait,
easier
wait,
for
why,
them.
Hal, why is it so hard for cricket and Netflix? Why is it so hard? Just really quickly, technical?
Yeah, because what you have in traditional CDN, content delivery networks, is essentially a set of servers that sit on what's called the edge, so essentially in the closest data center, and a system that allows your player on your device to be routed to the closest one. And those servers have a certain amount of capacity. Only so many people can connect to them and receive that before they are unable to serve within a decent time, and that's when you get buffering, etc. Now, when you have that level of demand, what needs to happen in the traditional architecture that I'm describing is the additional servers essentially need to be spun up to deal with that load. Now, that is called like horizontal scaling, and there are lots of ways to do that. Kubernetes is like one way, and essentially you can make the system reactive to certain limits that you hit, and it can automatically scale horizontally. Regardless of all of that, it is a hard problem, and there are limits to the ability to scale. And so I think what we saw with Netflix was an underestimation of the distribution and the volume of demand on that centralized CDN architecture, and then an inability to scale quick enough and then manage the ongoing requests at that scale. And this sounds like, oh, that's a hard problem. Surely they'll work it out. But actually, it's a problem of the architecture. And what Rilla presents is the ability to turn everybody who's watching into a relayer themselves. And we use AI to take telemetry of that network of peers that are connected into each other and continually optimize so that we have a optimal topology of relationships within that network. And what that means is that the capacity of the network grows organically as more people join the network. And so rather than having this centralized entity that's struggling to spin up new servers and get enough to serve 60, 80 million people, actually, as 60, 80 million people jump on, the capacity of that network grows organically. And so you don't get this massive centralized bottleneck of demand um, at the CDN edge. Um, it's fascinating to dig into, but it's also a very technically nuanced and complex conversation. And so I am careful when I start to have these conversations, and I'm trying to keep this high level without getting too nitty gritty. And there's no doubt streaming engineers that will be, twiddling their mustache and listening to this and be nitpicking through it. But that hopefully helps to understand sort of the broad strokes of why a peer-to-peer system, as long as you can keep it near optimal in terms of its topology, can far outstrip any centralized architecture in terms of capacity. It just grows organically.
And Hal, what's your vision for Rilla for making it accessible to people? Most folks watching, whether it's wrestling or baseball, you've got a wide age range, you've got a wide ability and technical skill set. Not everyone's a network specialist. How easy will it be for an everyday baseball fan, which I think the average age is in the 50s right now, to actually participate in something like this?
Yeah, it's a great shout, and it's a really important part of our initial thesis was that people shouldn't have to do anything to be part of these networks. And so, for example, with some of the global broadcasters that we're integrating with at the moment, they will have an application that you probably already have on your smart TV, for example. And the user experience for you will be you might download an update to that app. And with that update, the SDKs that broadcaster is integrated into, the Rilla SDKs, will be brought down, and your smart TV becomes a relay node. And so you start to get the benefit of being a relay through your broadcaster that easily. Now, when broadcasters catch on that they can start to spread this value around their subscriber base and they should expose this to them, then you'll become more aware of that and they will start to take market share. And that's just simple economics. But in the short term, you will become a relayer by being part of these networks and downloading your application, and you shouldn't have to do anything to start to reap the benefits of this technology being integrated.
So it manifests itself in some sort of app that's easy for people to watch, and vice versa. It participates in the network, and
That's right.
in theory, you'd earn some sort of rewards or something that you can benefit from.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So it should
Can
be transparent, essentially.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the reward system or the tokenomics or how you're thinking about that? The
Mm.
value distribution?
Yeah, it's important to get into. We have a primitive that we call a proof of contribution, and so the way that this works is within that peer-to-peer network, as you are sending some video, you're relaying some video to your neighbor, let's say, um, a cryptographic proof of that contribution is generated, and essentially you are then uh, able to verify that you've made that contribution. Now, depending on how the technology is deployed, how visible that is to you as a user depends on the implementation of the app, the person who's implementing it. But with some of the football teams we're talking to, that will literally manifest as a ability to claim a fan token within the app experience. Unfortunately, some of the big broadcasters are unlikely to integrate that directly into their applications in the nearest future. But then those rewards will be distributed in different ways. And so those broadcasters are looking at ways to distribute rewards through their applications and through their subscriptions. And you wouldn't have to deal with any cryptographic primitive at all yourself. It's just part of the accounting system. Now, if you get into an example such as Twitch, um, Twitch was bought by Amazon for about $1 billion in 2014, and they distribute about 50% of ad and subscription revenue out to their creators. And a large proportion of the rest of that, if you look at the economics, must go to their infrastructure providers, which I would imagine is probably AWS, being owned by Amazon. And if they were to re-architect everything based on Rilla, they would be able to redistribute a lot more of that value out to their creators and their communities. And so it's pretty easy to imagine a esports streaming platform that actually exposes these cryptographic proofs directly to the community members around their creators, their favorite creators, and allows them to claim that value and reuse that value within that ecosystem in different ways.
Do you envision each league or streaming broadcast service to have their own unique token, or will there be a Rilla that sits behind, like a Rilla token that sits behind all of these that you'd like to see broadly used?
So I don't think Rilla should dictate that. I think Rilla should be agnostic. And we're doing a bunch of work in this space at the moment. And so I can't talk specifically about why and what the plans are because come out with all that information once it's locked down.
You could
But
just announce it here, Hal. It's fine. You can announce it here.
maybe next time. But the technology needs to be open and adoptable and integratable regardless of what token you might imagine. And so, for example, a football team, this would allow them to easily integrate this system into their fan token and distribute their fan token through these cryptographic primitives. And that's really important because as a brand, that's extremely important for them in terms of the way that they interact with their fan base. But the way that that is cleared and managed in the back end is sort of the question that you're asking, and like the work there is TBC, and there's some really interesting stuff coming up, which we'll be announcing soon. We're actually in the process of locking it down and putting some funding around it actually. So yeah, it's coming together nicely.
You've clearly hit home the case for live sports. Is that the only focus, or do you think that Rilla expands beyond live sports to gaming or a decentralized version of Twitch? How do you see sort of the use cases evolving over the next couple of years?
So honestly, as an entrepreneur, focus is everything. And Rilla is laser focused on live sports, and live sports is the biggest prize today. Now, the underlying technology that drives Rilla, we call it intelligent collaboration networks. It's much more widely applicable. And we've always said that we're going to build the open and public protocol for the future of live content. Actually, it's slightly broader than that. And this is part of the work that we're doing at the moment. And so I'll sort of tiptoe around it a little bit because I don't want to talk too many specifics. But essentially, this technology will be made available in an open source, in a public and open protocol fashion for other areas. And music streaming and esports streaming are the obvious next two. And the technology that Rilla has created, Rilla's IP, can be licensed across and enable these business models to be completely rewired and the economics to actually work for some stuff. And like esports platforms talk to us a lot, and they say, oh, we really want to do user-generated tournaments where users, like groups of players, can come together and stream their tournaments to each other. But it's just too expensive. We can't expose ourselves in that way. And Rilla literally opens the door to that functionality and says, well, if you don't need a strict SLA and you're okay to deal with any potential glitches in the network that might appear, you can actually run this free. This can be a pure peer-to-peer streaming network that's supported by the gamers that are playing on their gaming rigs, and you can actually remove all the cost. And so this is the type of economic change and paradigm shift that is the reason why we're doing what we're doing. And so this will be available and will start to change other industries and beyond media streaming as well. There's some really exciting research and stuff that we're doing at the moment in other areas too. We're not going to try and boil the ocean. We're super focused on sports streaming, and we're going to execute that piece. That'll be an 8-figure ARR business in the next 4 to 5 years.
Do you think that it always is tied to a league or a fan engagement? What happens with these one-off things that people get very excited about? I think of something like in the US, there's the Kentucky Derby. It's one of the largest horse races. It's a live event, a lot of viewership, but it's not something that people are watching on a weekly basis.
There's a platform play within this that we've done a lot of talk and actually a bit of design around. And being able to provide a white labeled, cross-platform app framework that allows people to spin the stuff up is something we've talked about quite a bit. And that's the kind of thing you can imagine, where it's all pretty plug and play, and you can kind of no code or even vibe code your way into an experience that has the core live streaming setup available across devices. Yeah, it's a little way down the roadmap though.
Yeah, it's cool to think about for sure. All right. So you started early 2024, you did around mid 2024, you kind of launched this protocol last fall. You've had a lot of ideation. You've got some good stuff coming up with the tokenomics, the proof of contribution models. What comes next? How do you scale from here?
So we have just got to a point with our pilots with multiple global scale sports streamers that we are working through essentially the validation of the proof from those pilots to be able to do commercial deals and roll this technology out at scale globally, essentially. And so this is a huge deal for us. We're integrating both into hardware and into software, which is an interesting piece there. I won't double click on that now, but there's a lot there in terms of how the technology shows up across device networks. And we also have had access to a huge QA capability through those organizations, testing across arrays of diverse devices, and being able to be rolled out into their beta testing networks. So this is the big a set of events in front of us is the eventuation of our pilot programs. We can't talk about the exact brands we're working with publicly because we are essentially in secret skunkworks pilots with them, but we are talking about the biggest brands in the industry, and it's really exciting. The other piece of this is the D2C side, and so we're really starting to get engagement from sports teams and also sports leagues on the D2C side, and this is kind of an emerging trend within global live sports. And so, like I said, that's when the economic picture really starts to come together, and we start to see a different economic model where the people who are bringing the participation and the engagement are actually sharing in the rewards of the value that's being generated. And so we are in talks with multiple big football teams at the moment, and that's the other really exciting piece that sort of shows how this is going to take off.
Fantastic. How can people get involved today?
Yeah, this is a banger of a question. So, and the reason it is because peer-to-peer, one of the reasons that peer-to-peer technology is not widely adopted historically is because it's really hard to test. And we have really advanced testing, training, rigs where we simulate network conditions, we simulate diverse devices, and we can simulate scenarios to train our models and to be able to do what we do. But there's nothing that replaces the real world. And you can simulate entropy to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, getting it out in production, and when I mean production on real device networks, there's nothing that replaces that. And so one of the key parts of our strategy is to deploy a incentivized testing network for our community. And this is part of the strategy that we're in the process of forming up at the moment, and that we'll be announcing pretty soon. But essentially, the community can come together around this. You can download an app onto your device, and you can essentially be available for scanning networks and providing data that helps us train and allows us to map at the sort of internet protocol level, but more importantly, be part of the network for transient testing runs that we push out through that network. And so by doing that, you can get exposure to the wider network and the wider adoption of this core technology, and be part of the movement that essentially enables us to rebase the internet and rewire the economics so that us, as the people that are actually generating the value, can start to benefit from that value that's being generated. And that's the bit where I start to get goosebumps, because this is where the real essence of Web3 and community and everybody coming together is actually a fundamental part of the technological challenge that we have in front of us. And so watch the space. We'll be doing a lot of announcements probably in the next 3 to 4 months, where we'll be building our core community, engaging with people who care about these sorts of things, and giving people an opportunity to get involved early, get exposure to the impact that this technology is going to have on the world. And so watch this space. We'll be sharing relatively soon. It's exciting.
Well said, Hal, and totally agree. I love what you're doing. Appreciate the work here. We're happy to be supporting you and can't wait to test the app and try more and share more. But thank you for coming on for our listeners. Thanks for being on the Pirate Pod today.
Thanks for having me.